Hey everyone, this is Heidi St. John. Thanks for joining me. You've found me at my little corner of the internet. This is the Off the Bench podcast. And today I'm thrilled to have back with me on the show, Glenn Harwood. Yesterday, he shared his story of moving his family to Midland, Texas, and how he worked as a Assistant US Attorney and then as a federal prosecutor. He's currently running in Texas for district attorney in his area near Midland. And I'm thrilled to have him on today. We're going to be talking about the foster care system, which he knows quite a bit about. Stick around. I think you're going to be encouraged. So welcome to the show, everyone. I'm glad that you've joined me today. As I said yesterday at the open of the show, this is something that hits close to home for me. My sister has adopted two little boys out of the foster care system, and they have really changed her family for the better. It's really changed my sister and her husband just to see what God is doing as they have stepped outside of really their comfort zone and brought in a couple of little boys who desperately needed a mom and a dad. This is something that I think everyone should be concerned about. We have watched now for decades as our children have been the target of assault, from the assault on their minds. We've had the directors here of the mind polluters on my show. We're talking about what's happening in our public school system. Children are precious to the Lord. And if they're precious to the Lord, they should be precious to us. That's one of the reasons why I'm so glad to have Glenn Harwood back on the show. We're going to pick this topic right up. Glenn, my friend, thank you for coming back.
Thanks for having me.
So let's jump right into this because there's so many questions that I have. The biggest question that comes across my desk from people who are thinking about fostering is they're wondering what happens to their own family dynamic and how it changes. I mean, your kids are grown, and maybe you can go back and refresh my memory as to if your kids were home when you guys started fostering. But what is the impact on the family of origin as you look to fostering?
Yeah, and that's a fair question. In our circumstances, because we're old,
Watch it there,
yes,
mister.
That's right. Our younger two children at the time were in 9th grade and 11th grade, and we started fostering. And we were fostering children as young as 21 months and as old as about 12. So that's something to consider. If for example, if you had a teenage boy in your house, a 14-year-old boy that was your son, you might not want to foster a 14-year-old girl just because of the natural tensions and the issues that could arise. But we had older children and we were fostering younger children, so it wasn't as much of an issue. We've got friends who have fostered, and they've got, children that are toddlers and in early elementary school. And so, that's something that they consider. But when you foster, particularly in Texas, you can tell the agency that you're working with, hey, I'd like to have a 0 to 2-year-old to foster. I'd like a boy that's 5 years old-ish. So he's in that age range. Or, maybe you're an empty nester and you say, I just want to foster teenagers. So you can tell them what your preferences are. And we did that. We wanted to target certain demographics. We preferred to have boys, and we wanted them younger. And so, of course, we ended up with a girl.
Yeah.
Right. So, but no, you can kind of express your preferences based on where your family is, what your living situation is, what kind of rooms you have available. But on the other hand, you can integrate foster children into your own home. Foster children are allowed to share rooms with your original children, within certain limitations. But if you have a 4-year-old daughter and you foster a 3-year-old girl, they can share the same room. Okay. There's some space requirements and things like that, but it's not like you have to put the foster kids in the basement and you keep your kids, up in the upstairs. And that's how we viewed it. We wanted them to be, for however long they were with us, we wanted them to see a mom and a dad that cared for each other first and cared for them and give them an environment where they could see that the dysfunction that they came from doesn't have to be their future.
I love that. And I'm assuming that you guys, I'm trying to put myself through the decision-making process, because I know for my family, when they decided to get into fostering, they really came to this decision as a family together. So talking to the other children, hey, this is what, Dad and I are thinking about doing. Was that kind of how it went for your family?
It was a process. Our kids were not enamored of the idea until they met some foster kids at church, and they realized, wait a second, these are little kids that actually need a family, and so they warmed up to it. And it wasn't all unicorns and rainbows with the kids, because there's a natural tension when the attention of the parents is now split between foster kids who need certain types of attention and teenagers in high school. So it wasn't smooth, but it's been good, and it's been worth it. Our kids, of course, all of our kids love our adopted kids to death, and they wouldn't have it any other way. But that's where leadership comes in. Sometimes you got to look at the family and say, this is going to be hard. It may even be unpleasant, but we're going to do this because we think this is what God has called us to do.
Yeah, I can imagine, knowing what I know of the foster care system, there is a desperate need right now for good families, for loving families to take these kids in. And it seems like, at least here in the Pacific Northwest, it's reached a fever pitch. I mean, the foster care system is really broken. CPS is overwhelmed. Are you seeing the same thing in Texas that we're seeing here in the Northwest?
There is an incredible shortage of foster parents. Midland, Texas has the highest per capita income in Texas, the county. And I'm convinced I can walk neighborhoods and get thousands and thousands of dollars in donations. That doesn't help the foster care system. Right. What I need are those neighborhoods that are middle-class neighborhoods to actually open up their home and give that spare bedroom that they've got to a kid. So, people want to be generous and they want to support it. We need more than that. They actually have to do it. You can't subcontract out foster care to someone else. You have to be that person.
Boy, I've been saying for years on the show, you can't pass on what you don't possess. And, we're really good, I think, in the Christian culture about talking. I love Keith Green. I don't know if you remember Keith Green, but I used to listen to him a lot in the 70s and 80s. And I love that he said in one of his concerts, hey, how about you not, he heard the Lord say to him, how about you not send money this time? How about you go? And I think that is a large part of what you're saying. Like, there has to be a place in which we put feet to our faith. And there's never been a better place to do that than in the foster care system.
Yeah. And in Texas, if one family from every Christian church in Texas would adopt a child, that would cure the adoption crisis in Texas with foster children whose parents' rights have been terminated.
Say that again.
So if every church in Texas, every Christian church in Texas had one family that would adopt a child out of foster care, there would be no more children waiting to be adopted in Texas.
Wow. That is a stunning statement. The need is so great right now. We're going to take a quick break. When we come back, I want to talk to you about the process of moving from fostering to adoption. We'll be right back. So, Glenn, I can imagine that when you started this journey into the foster care movement, you weren't necessarily thinking of adoption, or you were thinking of it.
So, my wife was thinking of fostering, and I was thinking of fostering, but I think I had a more realistic outlook on how it works. And my realistic outlook is actually what happened, because you foster. And then you've had this kid for a while, and then all of a sudden the case develops, and the caseworker comes to you and say, okay, we're not looking at reunification with the family anymore. We're looking at termination. And then you're at a decision point. Do you tell this kid that you've cared for the last year or 2 years, good luck, I hope you find your dad?
Yeah.
Or do you just pick up with what you've been doing and take the next step? And that's the situation we found ourselves in twice. In fact, in our second adoption, we felt so strongly about it. We actually had to go to court and fight CPS, and we fortunately were successful, and we were able to have the girl returned to us, and we adopted her 2.5 years later.
Now, how did your daughter first come into your house what was the situation when she came in through the foster system?
So we had told CPS we want to adopt that we wanted to foster a little 5-year-old boy. And so they called us one day and said, we got a 4-year-old boy. And we said, okay, we'll do that. So they showed up at 10:30 that night with a 4-year-old boy, and he walked into the house and started walking around our house. And then 3 other caseworkers walked in, and one of them had this little baby on their hip. And we said, well, who's that? And they said, oh, that's the little sister. And we said, well, where's she going? And they said, oh, she's going to Lubbock because we don't have any places in Midland for her. And we said, well, we'll keep her here. And they said, oh, really? And they pulled the paperwork out from behind their back and said, okay, just sign here. So that's how she came to us the first time. And they were with us for about a year. And they kind of bounced around the system a little bit after that. They ended up going back to their mom, and we had a good relationship with the mom. And that's important. It's a ministry to kids, but sometimes the unintended consequence is you actually are able to show God's love to the family that's going through this.
Right.
And because we had such a good relationship with the mom, in fact, she actually told me on the phone one time that my wife was just so kind to her. Wow. And that's why she was willing to let us maintain a relationship with her family. So even after the kids were returned to her, she let us come up and visit them. They lived in Lubbock at the time, which is about 2 hours away. So we'd go visit them and take them to Chick-fil-A and the trampoline park and spend time with them and spend birthdays with them. But unfortunately, she wasn't able to maintain a household, and CPS took the kids again. And that's the point at which we ended up having to sue and try to intervene in the case to get the little girl returned to us. Oftentimes, and it was in this case, there are a number of kids and a number of different dads. So we successfully won in court and got her back, and so she lived with us for another little over 2 years, and we finally were able to adopt her. Tragically, her mom passed away in a car accident, but we were able to adopt her, and so she's had some good stability for the last 3 years with us.
Wow, that's an amazing story. I can't help but think, as you're talking about these kids coming in and out of your home, that at some point, the emotional pressure and the stress of kids coming in, kids coming out can get to be overwhelming, because I would imagine that you can get attached, you just fall in love with the kid, and then it's time to send them back to their parents, or like what you guys went through with the CPS. We had a mom over at a ministry that I oversee not too long ago who'd had a little boy from the time he was 2 months old until he was 5. And they got a call one day and just said, we got family, and the family wants the boy. And within 2 weeks, they had taken this little boy from the only home he'd ever known, from a family that loved him and were planning on adopting him. So it seems to me, and this mom is posting this story. It's heart-wrenching. It's risky business, but love is risky. Love is risky business. What happens when it doesn't work out?
Yeah, it's the biggest hurdle people throw up is, I couldn't do that because I couldn't bear to see them go.
Yeah.
And we just need to put that to bed. The alternative is that we leave it to people who don't care.
Yeah.
And that's not the right alternative. The reality is, everybody I know that's been involved in foster care for any length of time has had their heart broken, but it's worth it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, I think that's the third time I've heard you say it's worth it, and we're not doing, it's like homeschooling. I always tell moms, it's the hardest, best thing you'll ever do. There's going to be days when you just wonder why in the world you signed up for this thing in the first place. But when you look back at it, you discover that all of the good things about this life are hard. They're the hard things.
And when I say it's worth it, I don't mean it's worth it for my family, quite frankly. It's hard. It's draining. What I mean is looking at the people's lives that you impact. It's worth it. It's worth it to go through the pain and the difficulty to have a positive, Christ-like impact on a child, on a foster, on a family that's going through the process. It's worth it. It's worth it for your Christian witness. It's not a pleasant thing all the time for people who are foster parents. But neither is a lot of hard Christian ministry.
Right. Yeah, it's so true. And I wrote down what you said. If just one family from every Christian church in Texas would adopt a child out of the system, it would solve the adoption crisis. And it just begs the question, where is the church? We had a young woman on the show not too long ago who worked with kind of an intermediary, like someone who came in and just walked them through the process of adoption. Do you do the same thing? Can you do the same thing in fostering to adopt?
Yeah, so in Texas, it's actually pretty simple. There's a couple different ways that you could adopt, and a lot of people, if their vision of adoption is limited to coming home from the hospital with a brand new baby that you raise from day one, then that's harder. Now, having said that, I can name a half dozen families that I personally know who have done that through the foster care system. Through various mechanisms that happens. And I would also say that everybody that I know that has wanted to adopt out of the foster care system, who does it long enough, gets an opportunity. But we've also known people who have used it as a ministry and have adopted for decades or have fostered for decades and never adopted anybody. They've limited their ministry to foster care, and they're doing the Lord's work, but they've just chosen not to adopt, and that serves an important role as well. But in Texas, for the children who are available for adoption, meaning all the parental rights have been terminated, they've generally been in the system for a while, and there's been no success finding their families. You can do what's called foster to adopt. You can get certified and licensed, and then have one of those children placed in your home. You actually go to a website, and you can actually pick a kid off of a website and say, I'd like to, talk about fostering to adopt that kid. And CPS can place that kid in your home. And at the end of 6 months, you can adopt that child.
Wow.
It's such a momentous event.
Is that just Texas or is that nationwide?
Well, I think each state, has their own way of doing things. But in Texas, it's as simple as that. The other mechanism is, if you're fostering the child through the CPS process and the parents' rights are terminated, then after a year, after you've fostered for 6 months, even in that circumstance, then you're eligible to adopt. So it's possible to be licensed to foster or adopt, which is how we got licensed, so that in the event that circumstance arose, we would be ready. I mean, we were preparing for the thing that we didn't know was going to happen, and then it happened, and it happened twice. So, and the other thing I want to mention is a lot of people are concerned about costs, and you see a lot of people raising funds for adoptions and things like that. At least in Texas, adopting and fostering does not cost you a dime. Now, it costs your life, but it doesn't cost you money.
Now, you get a certain amount of financial assistance, right, from the state when you start fostering? That goes to help with what? Anything that you want it to, or how does that work?
Yeah, Texas does a good job. When you foster a kid who doesn't have any special needs, the state of Texas gives you $27 a day. That's not earn a living money, but it at least helps with normal expenses.
Sure.
There were several occasions where my wife was changing a bed sheet at 2 a.m. Because a kid had an accident, and I would go in there and I'd just give her a hug and say, "Just remember, baby, we're making $1 an hour doing this." So, but you do get a stipend. The children are on Medicaid in Texas, so all of their health care is covered. Their vision care, their dental care. So there's not a financial burden on foster parents.
Okay.
And some of that, depending on the circumstances, some of that can continue into adoption. In Texas, for example, if you adopt a child out of foster care, they get free in-state tuition at any Texas university, Texas State University. So, for people of more modest means, they don't have to worry about all the predictions about it cost $250,000 to raise a child, because Texas is going to help you. If you take care of one of Texas's children, they're going to help you with your medical expenses and even your college expenses in the event that child goes to college in Texas.
I love that. That's awesome. Well, there's so many more questions I could ask you, but we're out of time for today. I want to just sort of end with this question. You were just talking about how it's hard, but it's worth it. And when you look back, because I'm thinking of parents who might be just a few years behind you, or they're just now starting to consider looking into fostering, maybe fostering to adopt. When you look back, is there anything that you would have changed, anything you would have done differently in the fostering adoption journey?
If I could have, I would have done it 20 years ago when I was a younger. And we really, it's contagious. We started fostering because we knew one other couple that had done it. And then after we started doing it, some of our younger friends looked at us and said, well, if those old people can do it, we can do it. And so we had a group at our church, of 5 or 6 couples that were doing this, and several have adopted in foster care. And so it's been nice to see. Our goal now is to step back and do respite work where we take in foster kids from foster parents who need to get away for a weekend, or who have a family event, or who are traveling out of state and decide not to take the kids with them. So we want to be in more of a support role, but I don't know that I would have done anything differently, because I didn't dictate how things went in the first place.
Yeah. We
made ourselves available. When I was in the Army, I used to say that God speaks through my assignments officer, because that's where he tells me where I'm going next.
That's right.
And in foster care, what we've said is God speaks through the caseworker, because the caseworker calls us and says, here's a kid for you. And we say yes. Wow.
That's a powerful story. Are there any good websites that you'd recommend for people to go to for information on fostering and adopting?
In Texas, I would definitely say you can look on the DFPS website, but there's a lot of good agencies that are faith-based in Texas. Buckner International operates in Texas. Texas Home for Children operates in Texas. So I would just Google Christian adoption agencies in your state, and that's where I would start. Texas does a pretty good job of the state of Texas partnering with churches. Mm-hmm. They actually have somebody on staff with the state of Texas whose job is to liaise with churches, because Texas knows that the solution for this problem lies within the churches.
Right.
And 100%. So, and certainly if any of your listeners are from Texas, they are welcome to contact me, because I know a little bit about the system in Texas, and they can find me on Facebook and shoot me an email, and I'd be glad to put them in contact with someone in their local area.
I love that. And we'll link back to that also in the show notes today. Glenn Harwood, it's just been a real pleasure to have you on the show and just hear your story. And I cannot wait to see what God does with your coming on the show and just talking about this, and how many kids end up with forever homes because of your willingness to share your story. Thank you so much for doing that. I wish you all the best in your run for district attorney. And thank you for getting off the bench and onto the battlefield.
Thanks for having me.
You're welcome. You guys, I hope this has been encouraging for you today. We're going to link back to some adoption agencies and some information if you're looking for national information on adopting, or where we talked about a couple weeks ago, the federal registry of where you can start looking what's happening in your area with regard to the foster care system. I hope you guys will engage. There are so many children that need good homes right now, and you have an opportunity to be the hands and feet of Jesus. Thank you guys so much for listening. I'll see you back here tomorrow at the intersection of faith and culture.